Hello, I'm Alan Newberry, and this is the final part in a 4-part series on making a stock removal knife in which I make this knife right here one of my pocket cutlasses. In this episode, we're going to do handle shaping and knife sharpening. So let's go take a look. Here is where we left off from part 3. We have a knife that is all glued up and we've given it time for the glue to set up. And so now we're going to cut off the thong hole tubing that is in excess, as well as if we have a lot of corvy bolts sticking out, we'll cut that off as well. In this case, the corvy bolts don't stick out that much, so I just go ahead and I'll grind those off. The first thing that we're going to do on the grinder is come over to the flat platen, and we are going to grind off the excess corvy bolt as well as the excess thong hole tubing and just get it nice and flat. Be careful to grind just a little bit at a time here and there on the tubing and the corvy bolts because it will get very hot and burn the handle material if you're not very careful. Once we have the sides flattened, we can move on to profiling the handle area using a coarse grit to get down close to the metal but not quite touching it. Then moving on to finer grits. I like to end up on a 120 grit belt. Once you get close to it, you're going to start seeing sparks once you hit the metal. You're also going to be able to see a line where the glue is. So what you're going to try to do is get it nice and clean all the way through there where you've got nice shiny metal, made it up really nicely to the handle material. You'll see a difference in the sparks when you get there. When you hit metal, you'll hit sparks, and you'll also hear a difference. So go slow once you've done that. Once I have it profiled, I can now start to work on any sort of tapering or shaping that I want to do on the other sides of the handle. So what I'm going to do here with the pocket cutlasses, I like to have a little bit of a taper, so I will thin down the area closer to the blade end of the knife and leave the back end fat. You can kind of see right here where I've gotten just a little bit of a taper going. After this, I'm going to move on to either a small wheel attachment or I'll move on to the rotary platen. In this case, this is the small wheel attachment. I'm going to show you both ways so that you can see two different methods of doing it. Using a coarse belt, either a 60 or 36 grit belt, what I'm going to do is just remove the corners of the handle material. I'm not doing any real radiusing, just flat corners taken right off. After that, what I'm going to do is move on to the next grit belt. So in this case, we're going to use a 120 grit belt, and now I'm going to start smoothing that over and doing some of the rounding. This is where it will really start to look like a knife. Yeah, here you can see where I've rounded it over. I haven't got everything perfectly round or perfectly lined up everywhere, but the rounding has started to take shape. For the next step, I'm going to show you how to do it with the rotary platen. You could do all of this shaping work with either the rotary platen or the small wheel attachment. I prefer to use the rotary platen because it's good at not leaving the corvy bolt and thong hole tubing proud, which can sometimes happen with the small wheel attachment. At this point, we're using 220 grit belt, which is good for fine-tuning the shaping of the handle. So here I'm kind of going back and really doing the actual shaping of the butt end of the knife, which is kind of a tricky area. After that, the handle is basically finished shaped and everything's about where I want it. You can do a little bit of fine tuning with the next grit, which is 400 grit, so it's especially good there in the butt end, and making sure you have everything just dialed in, really making sure you got all the scratches out. But after that, the handle is basically shaped, although a little fine tuning with hand sanding is generally a good idea. Now we can start addressing the spine of the knife and the sides of the knife. So what we're going to do there is try to get rid of the scratches by going in a lengthwise pattern. And what we're going to do with that too is use the largest wheel that we can get into the spaces to avoid putting in divots. When you use the smaller wheels, it likes to put in a lot of divots. So the larger the wheel you use, the less they're going to put in there. So right here I'm using the rotary platen just to get on a little bit of the bottom of the handle and to get onto the point of the knife as well. Now I'm using the small wheel to get into the little nooks and crannies. I also use my 14-inch wheel to get the parts that aren't in the nooks and crannies. So on the spine of the knife and a lot of the handle, a lot of that is done with my 14-inch wheel. Now you can move on to hand sanding to make sure you've got any little fine tuning that needs to be done. After this we'll do buffing. So in this case, this knife has already been buffed a little bit, but then I noticed a little area that needed just a little bit more blending with the sandpaper, so I'm just going back and doing a little bit more sanding there. But hand sanding before buffing is generally a good idea. I like to go to about 400 grit at least for buffing. I'm using a white compound here, and I'm just getting all of the surfaces of the handle. I'm trying to kind of avoid hitting up any of the metal parts because I don't really like the finish that it leaves. After that, you can move on to sharpening. I like to sharpen with a well-used 120 grit belt for my machine sharpening. Once you run it over, do one side lightly, then do the other side lightly, and you can see that I use my hands to feel for the burr that it raises. So I'll do that and then feel for the burr and see if I've got the burr everywhere, and feel where the little trouble spots are that haven't got it yet. Once the burr is raised everywhere, you're going to need to remove the burr. So in this case, I am using a cardboard wheel to remove the burr. I've got a little bit of white compound on there, and then I'm just going to kind of buzz over the burr on one side, flip over to the other side, and go over it real quick. And then after you've done that on both sides, you can check to see if you feel the burr anywhere. Once you've removed the burr from everywhere and you feel like you've got it, then you're basically done. But you'll of course want to check that, which is what we will do next. There are many ways to test your sharpness. One way is to cut paper. Whenever I do this, I like to do it slowly at first, and I'm feeling if there are any snags in there. If there are, it may be that the burr didn't get removed, or that there's some other issue with the sharpening. So if there is, then go back and take a look at it and fix any issues that have arisen. And now that the knife is sharp, we have our finished pocket cutlass. Thanks for watching. This was part 4 of a 4-part series, so please be sure and go back and watch the other videos if you haven't seen them already, and check out my other videos while you're at it. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and if you have any questions, put them in the comments section down below. Thanks.